Tonight, we travel back to the Middle Ages, not to the battlefields or royal courts that often dominate popular imagination, but to something quieter and more personal. When many people picture medieval life, they imagine hard work, strict social rules, and little time for recreation. And life could indeed be demanding. Farmers worked the fields, craftsmen labored in workshops, and nobles managed vast estates. Yet medieval people were still people. They played games, collected unusual objects, cared for animals, experimented with curious ideas, and spent their free hours pursuing interests that brought enjoyment, status, or simple satisfaction. These hobbies connected communities, encouraged learning, and offered a welcome break from everyday responsibilities. So settle in, get comfortable, and imagine the sound of distant church bells drifting across a medieval town as we explore some of the most unusual hobbies that actually existed in the Middle Ages. Part 1. Competitive games and skill-based recreation. Imagine that it is a cool afternoon in a medieval town. The marketplace is beginning to quiet. Merchants are packing away goods. Craftsmen are closing their workshops. The busiest hours of work have passed. And for a short time, people can devote attention to something else. Contrary to popular assumptions, medieval recreation was not rare. People sought entertainment whenever circumstances allowed. Some activities were simple. Others demanded years of practice and dedication. Among the most respected of these hobbies was gaming. One of the most famous examples was chess. Chess had arrived in Europe through centuries of cultural exchange stretching across Asia and the Islamic world. By the high Middle Ages, it had become a favorite pastime among nobles, clergy, and educated urban residents. The game itself was different from modern chess in certain respects. Rules evolved gradually over time. Pieces moved differently, and strategies reflected earlier traditions. Yet the central attraction remained the same. Chess offered something unusual. It was a competition that depended not on physical strength but on patience, foresight, and planning. Imagine sitting beside a fireplace in a stone hall during winter. Outside, cold winds sweep across the countryside. Inside, two players lean over a carved wooden board. Conversation becomes quieter. Every move carries consequences. For medieval players, chess could represent more than entertainment. Writers often compared the board to society itself. Kings, bishops, knights, and common soldiers all appeared in symbolic form. Playing well demonstrated discipline and intelligence. Manuals discussing strategy circulated among educated readers, showing that the game was often treated with surprising seriousness. But chess was not the only game. Many medieval people enjoyed various board games that modern historians group under the category of tables games. These games were ancestors of modern backgammon. Players moved pieces across marked boards according to rolls of dice. Luck played a larger role than in chess, but skill remained important. Understanding probabilities, managing risks, and anticipating opponents all contributed to success. Such games appeared in castles, monasteries, inns, and homes. Archaeologists frequently discover gaming pieces made from bone, wood, antler, and stone. Even people with limited resources often found ways to participate. The popularity of these games reveals something important about medieval life. People valued moments of mental challenge. After long periods of physical labor, a game provided an opportunity to exercise different abilities. Competition also extended far beyond board games. Archery became one of the most widespread recreational activities in many regions. In England especially, archery occupied a unique position. Kings frequently encouraged practice, because skilled archers strengthen military capabilities. As a result, communities organized regular shooting events. What began as practical training often became a hobby. Imagine standing at the edge of a village green. Targets are placed in the distance. Groups gather to watch. One archer steps forward. The bow bends. The string releases. A moment later, the arrow strikes its mark. The crowd responds with quiet approval. Participants spent years improving technique. They compared equipment, discussed methods, and competed for recognition. Success brought prestige. The hobby combined recreation with social standing. People who excelled could become locally famous. Similar competitions appeared throughout Europe. Throwing contests, wrestling matches, and tests of strength often occurred during festivals and holidays. These events rarely resembled modern organized sports. Rules varied from place to place. Traditions differed between regions. Yet the underlying purpose remained familiar. People enjoyed measuring their abilities against others. In rural communities, stone-throwing contests were especially common. A large stone might serve as a traditional challenge passed down through generations. Young participants attempted to lift or throw it farther than their predecessors. The activity required no special equipment. It relied only upon strength, determination, and local reputation. Many such traditions survived for centuries. Some continue in modified form even today. Nobles pursued their own competitive recreations. Among the most famous were tournaments. Modern imagination often associates tournaments exclusively with warfare, but many evolved into elaborate recreational events. Participants displayed horsemanship, skill, and courage before large audiences. Preparation itself could become a hobby. Maintaining horses required significant attention. Armor needed care. Techniques demanded constant practice. A knight might devote countless hours to improving performance long before entering a competition. Riding exercises, practice with weapons, and careful preparation of horses could occupy a significant part of daily life. For some nobles, tournaments became more than occasional events. They became long-term pursuits that required dedication, patience, and continual improvement. For spectators, tournaments offered excitement. Travelers sometimes journeyed considerable distances to witness important competitions. Merchants, entertainers, and visitors gathered alongside local residents, transforming the occasion into a major social event. For participants, tournaments provided a structured way to demonstrate personal achievement. Success could bring admiration, reputation, and sometimes valuable prizes. Even those who did not win gained experience and the opportunity to test their abilities against skilled opponents. Importantly, these activities reinforced social bonds. People gathered not only to compete, but to watch, discuss, and celebrate. Communities formed around shared interests. Skills were passed from one generation to the next. Older participants offered advice to younger ones, while stories of memorable competitions remained part of local memory for years. In this respect, medieval hobbies were not very different from modern ones. A person who became deeply interested in archery, gaming, or competition often found companions who shared the same passion. Friendships developed, rivalries emerged, local champions earned recognition. Small victories became stories retold during gatherings, meals, and seasonal festivals. Stories circulated, memories accumulated, and as evening approached and the marketplace finally emptied, conversations about victories and defeats continued long after the games themselves had ended. People discussed remarkable shots, clever strategies, and moments of unexpected success. Such conversations helped keep communities connected long after the competition was over. In a world without television, smartphones, or modern entertainment, these activities provided something valuable. They created meaning within everyday life. They offered opportunities to learn, improve, and participate in a larger community. And they remind us that medieval people, despite living in a very different world, enjoyed many of the same pleasures that people seek today: challenge, improvement, companionship, recognition among peers, and the quiet satisfaction of developing a skill over time. Part 2. Collecting, Curiosities, and Medieval Obsessions. As the excitement of games and competitions fades into the background, we can turn our attention to a quieter side of medieval recreation. Not every hobby involved physical skill or public gatherings. Some medieval people preferred activities built around curiosity itself. They collected unusual objects. They searched for rare items. They treasured strange things brought from distant lands. And in doing so, they revealed something surprisingly familiar about human nature. People have always been fascinated by objects that seem unusual, beautiful, mysterious, or difficult to obtain. The medieval world was no exception. Imagine entering the private chamber of a wealthy noble or respected church official. The room might contain books, decorative carvings, imported fabrics, and various personal possessions. Among these items, you might discover objects whose purpose was not entirely practical. A polished shell from a distant coastline, an unusual stone with an uncommon shape, a carved piece of ivory brought through long trade routes, a small object purchased from a traveler who claimed to have visited lands far beyond the horizon. Such possessions often became treasured curiosities. Part of their appeal came from rarity. Most medieval people traveled only short distances from where they were born. News from distant regions arrived slowly. Exotic goods appeared only occasionally. As a result, unusual objects carried a sense of wonder. Owning something from far away allowed a person to feel connected to a larger world. Trade networks stretched across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Merchants carried spices, textiles, precious materials, and countless smaller goods from one region to another. Not everything imported was expensive, but even relatively modest items could become conversation pieces. Visitors might ask where an object came from. Its owner might explain how it was acquired. Stories became attached to possessions, and often those stories were nearly as valuable as the objects themselves. In some cases, the desire to collect unusual items became closely connected to pilgrimage. Throughout the Middle Ages, millions of people undertook journeys to religious destinations. Some traveled to local shrines. Others crossed entire countries. A smaller number journeyed hundreds or even thousands of miles. Pilgrimages could take months. Occasionally, they lasted years. When travelers returned home, they often brought souvenirs. These were not merely reminders of travel. They also served as visible proof that the journey had taken place. A small badge purchased near a shrine might be attached to clothing. A carved token could be displayed in the home. A special container filled with water or soil from a sacred location might become a cherished possession. Over time, many people accumulated collections of such items. Each object represented a story. Each story represented a journey. And each journey added to a person's reputation within the community. Collecting, therefore, became more than simple ownership. It became a way of preserving experiences. The medieval fascination with relics created another unusual form of collecting. Today, the word relic often brings to mind religious objects, and indeed many relics were associated with saints or sacred history. To medieval believers, relics carried profound spiritual significance. Churches competed to acquire them. Monasteries carefully protected them. Pilgrims traveled great distances to see them. Yet relic collecting also reveals something broader about medieval culture. People were deeply interested in tangible connections to the past. A relic represented a physical link between ordinary life and sacred history. Whether housed in a great cathedral or a small village church, such objects attracted attention and admiration. Some collections became extraordinarily large. Church treasuries accumulated relics, decorative containers, manuscripts, and other valuable items over generations. Visitors came not only to worship, but also to observe these remarkable collections. In a sense, some medieval religious institutions performed functions that modern museums would later adopt. They preserved objects, they displayed them, and they encouraged people to contemplate their significance. Curiosity extended beyond religious items as well. Medieval people often showed great interest in unusual features of the natural world. An oddly shaped fossil, a remarkably large animal horn, an unusually colored stone, a strange shell, a rare feather. Such discoveries frequently attracted attention. Without modern scientific explanations, natural objects could appear mysterious and remarkable. People attempted to understand them using the knowledge available at the time. Some explanations were accurate, others were imaginative, yet the underlying impulse remained the same. Human beings are naturally curious. They enjoy encountering things that seem different from the ordinary. Imagine a traveler arriving in a town carrying a collection of unusual objects gathered during years of wandering. Residents might gather around, children would stare, adults would ask questions. Where was this found? What kind of creature produced it? How far away did it come from? The object itself became the center of conversation. And conversation was one of the most important forms of entertainment available. Curiosity could transform even a small item into an evening's worth of discussion. Among wealthy households, collections gradually became more organized. Although the famous cabinets of curiosities usually belong to the Renaissance and early modern periods, some of their roots can be found earlier. Medieval collectors occasionally gathered groups of unusual items specifically because they found them interesting. These collections might include natural objects, imported goods, artistic works, rare books, and unusual artifacts. The goal was not always practical. Sometimes the goal was simply wonder, to possess objects that inspired questions, to own things that few neighbors had ever seen, to create a small personal world filled with reminders of distant places and remarkable stories. Books themselves could become objects of collection. Today, books are common. In the Middle Ages, they were precious. Every manuscript required labor. Pages had to be prepared. Text had to be copied by hand. Illustrations demanded additional effort. As a result, even a modest collection represented significant investment. Some medieval readers developed strong interests in acquiring manuscripts. Religious texts, histories, poetry, scientific works, and classical writings all attracted collectors. Building a library could become a lifelong project. Each new volume expanded knowledge. Each manuscript represented months or years of work by skilled scribes. For educated individuals, collecting books offered both personal satisfaction and social prestige. A respected library demonstrated learning. Visitors admired it. Scholars consulted it. Future generations inherited it. In this way, the hobby of collecting could also contribute to preserving knowledge itself. What makes these medieval hobbies especially interesting is their familiarity. The objects may have been different. The cultural context was certainly different, yet the motivations remain recognizable. People collected souvenirs. They searched for rare items. They displayed possessions that reflected their interests. They shared stories about acquisitions. They enjoyed discovering something unusual and showing it to friends. These are behaviors that continue today. A modern collector might gather coins, stamps, books, or antiques. A medieval collector pursued different objects, but often experienced similar feelings. The excitement of discovery, the pleasure of ownership, the satisfaction of completing a collection, and perhaps most importantly, the opportunity to connect with others who shared the same fascination. As evening settled over a medieval town and candles flickered behind wooden shutters, conversations often turned toward stories of distant places and unusual discoveries. Someone might describe a relic seen during a pilgrimage. Another might display a rare object purchased from a merchant. A traveler could recount encounters with unfamiliar customs and landscapes. The listeners might never visit those places themselves. Yet through stories and objects, they could briefly imagine a wider world. And so collecting became more than a hobby. It became a way of exploring beyond the limits of everyday life. For many medieval people, curiosity itself was a pastime, a quiet pastime, a patient pastime, one built not around speed or competition, but around observation, memory, and wonder. And in a world where most horizons remain distant, that sense of wonder could be a valuable form of recreation indeed. Part 3. Animals as a medieval hobby. As collections of curiosities filled shelves and stories of distant places circulated through towns and noble households, another unusual hobby occupied the attention of many medieval people. This hobby was not centered on objects. It was centered on living creatures. Animals played an important role throughout medieval society. They provided labor, transportation, food, protection, and companionship. Most people interacted with animals every day. Yet, for some individuals, animals became much more than practical necessities. They became a source of fascination, a source of pride, and sometimes a hobby that demanded years of dedication. Perhaps no medieval pastime was more admired than falconry. Imagine a quiet morning shortly after sunrise. Mist lingers above the fields. The air is cool. A noble rider moves slowly across the countryside, accompanied by attendants. Perched calmly upon a gloved hand sits a trained bird of prey, a falcon. To modern observers, falconry may seem unusual, but throughout much of medieval Europe, it was among the most prestigious hobbies available. Training a hunting bird required patience, skill, and knowledge. Falcons, hawks, and other birds of prey could not simply be commanded. Their handlers had to build trust over time. They learned the habits of individual birds. They carefully controlled feeding schedules. They spent countless hours observing behavior and practicing techniques. Success could not be rushed. In many ways, falconry rewarded patience more than force. A well-trained bird became a source of immense pride. Nobles discussed training methods. They exchanged advice. They compared the abilities of different birds. Specialized books were even written explaining proper techniques and care. For experienced practitioners, falconry became a lifelong interest. The appeal extended beyond hunting itself. There was pleasure in the training process, pleasure in observation, pleasure in gradually developing a partnership between human and animal. And there was also prestige. A magnificent falcon perched on a noble's arm communicated status immediately. Visitors noticed. Travelers described impressive birds they encountered. Owners often became known for the quality of their animals. Not all animal hobbies involved hunting. Many medieval people enjoyed keeping songbirds. The sounds of birds filled medieval life. Forests, fields, and gardens echoed with calls throughout the year. Some individuals wish to bring a small part of that natural world closer to home. Songbirds were sometimes kept in carefully crafted cages. Owners appreciated their appearance, their behavior, and especially their music. Imagine a quiet chamber, illuminated by morning light. Nearby, a small bird begins to sing. The sound is gentle, unhurried, a familiar part of daily life. For many people, such simple pleasures provided welcome moments of calm. Keeping birds required attention and care. Food had to be provided. Cages needed maintenance. The health of the animal demanded constant observation. For devoted owners, these responsibilities became part of the hobby itself. Another surprisingly popular pastime involved pigeons. Today, pigeons are often overlooked in cities, but medieval people viewed them quite differently. Pigeon keeping could become a serious pursuit. Many estates maintained dovecotes, special structures designed to house large numbers of birds. Some served practical purposes by providing food and fertilizer. But for others, breeding and caring for pigeons became an interest in its own right. Owners observed different colors, patterns, and behaviors. They monitored breeding pairs. They took pride in healthy flocks. The activity required planning and patience. Results appeared gradually over months and years. Like gardening, pigeon keeping rewarded long-term attention rather than immediate success. Dogs also occupied a special place in medieval recreation. Working dogs were common throughout society, but hunting dogs often inspired particular admiration. Among nobles especially, maintaining kennels became a major commitment. A skilled hunting dog represented years of training. Handlers learned individual personalities. They studied behavior. They developed techniques for encouraging desirable traits. Many owners formed strong attachments to their animals. Medieval writings occasionally describe favored dogs with surprising affection. These were not merely tools. They were companions, partners in outdoor activities, participants in a shared pursuit. Imagine a noble estate preparing for a hunt. Dogs wait eagerly. Handlers move among them. Everyone understands their role. Years of practice and familiarity have created routines that feel almost effortless. The enjoyment came not only from the hunt itself, but from the daily care and training that preceded it. For some enthusiasts, managing kennels became nearly as important as any other aspect of noble recreation. At the highest levels of society, fascination with animals sometimes took even more unusual forms. Medieval rulers occasionally acquired exotic creatures from distant lands. These animals arrived through diplomacy, trade, or gifts exchanged between powerful courts. To people who had never traveled far from home, such creatures could appear astonishing. Imagine hearing reports that a foreign ruler had sent an unfamiliar animal, unlike anything seen in local forests or fields. Word would spread quickly. Visitors might travel considerable distances simply to catch a glimpse. Kings and princes occasionally maintained collections of unusual animals within their residences. These collections were not zoos in the modern sense. They were often small and limited. Yet they reflected a growing fascination with the wider world. An exotic creature represented more than curiosity. It symbolized connections reaching across continents. Possessing such an animal demonstrated wealth, influence, and access to distant networks. Stories about these creatures circulated widely. Many people never saw them firsthand. Yet descriptions passed from traveler to traveler, becoming part of local conversation and imagination. Even among ordinary people, observing wildlife could become a pastime. Medieval forests contained deer, birds, rabbits, foxes, and countless other creatures. Individuals who spent time outdoors naturally became familiar with animal behavior. Some learned to recognize tracks. Others observed seasonal migrations. knowledge accumulated through experience. This knowledge was often practical, but it could also become a source of enjoyment. A person might spend hours watching birds near a river or studying animals in woodland clearings. Without modern distractions, careful observation of nature occupied an important place in everyday recreation. Animals offered endless variety. No two behaved exactly alike. There was always something new to notice, something new to learn, something unexpected to observe. What unites all of these activities is a common theme. Medieval hobbies were often built upon patience. Animal keeping demanded time. Training demanded consistency. Observation demanded attention. Unlike modern entertainment, which frequently delivers immediate stimulation, many medieval pastimes unfolded slowly. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Progress appeared gradually. Relationships developed gradually, knowledge accumulated gradually, and perhaps that slow pace was part of the appeal. The hobby itself became woven into everyday life. A falcon required daily care. A pigeon flock required supervision. A kennel required maintenance. A songbird required attention. These activities created routines. They encouraged observation. They rewarded dedication. As evening approached and shadows lengthened across fields and castle walls, animals remained constant companions within medieval society. The falcon returned to its perch. The pigeons settled into their dovecote. Dogs rested after a long day. Birdsong faded with the light, and the people who cared for these creatures experienced a form of satisfaction that feels remarkably familiar even today. The tools and techniques may have changed. The social world was certainly different. Yet the pleasure of caring for an animal, learning its habits, earning its trust, and sharing daily life with it remains deeply recognizable. For medieval people, animals were often far more than practical necessities. They were companions in leisure, partners in recreation, objects of fascination. And for many, they became the center of hobbies that could last a lifetime. Part 4. Amateur learning, observation, and experiments. As the sounds of birds and hunting dogs fade into the background, we arrive at another side of medieval recreation that may surprise modern audiences. Many people imagine the Middle Ages as an era with little interest in learning beyond religious institutions. The reality was more complicated. While opportunities for education were certainly limited compared to today, curiosity remained a powerful force. People wanted to understand the world around them. They wanted to observe, measure, record, and explain. And for some medieval individuals, learning itself became a hobby, not a profession, not a duty, but a personal passion pursued during whatever free time life allowed. Imagine a clear night in the countryside. The day's work is finished. The village has grown quiet. Above, the sky stretches endlessly across the darkness. Without electric lights, medieval people experienced a night sky far brighter than most modern observers ever see. Thousands of stars filled the heavens. The Milky Way formed a glowing band overhead. Planets moved slowly among the constellations. Every clear evening offered an opportunity for observation. For many people, the stars carried religious and symbolic meaning, but others developed a deeper fascination. They learned to identify constellations. They followed the changing positions of celestial bodies. They observed how the night sky shifted with the seasons. This interest often blended practical knowledge with genuine curiosity. Sailors relied on the heavens for navigation. Farmers watched seasonal cycles. Travelers used familiar stars to guide journeys. Yet beyond practical needs, there was also simple wonder. Looking upward encouraged questions. Questions about time, questions about distance, questions about the structure of the universe itself. For educated individuals, astronomy could become a lifelong interest. Manuscripts circulated containing diagrams of celestial movements. Scholars copied observations. Teachers explained ancient theories inherited from Greek, Roman, and Islamic traditions. Learning about the heavens connected medieval observers to centuries of accumulated knowledge. One object frequently associated with this hobby was the astrolabe. To modern eyes, an astrolabe appears both scientific and artistic. Made from carefully crafted metal, it allowed users to perform a variety of calculations related to astronomy and timekeeping. Owning such an instrument required education. Using it effectively required practice. For many scholars, clergy, and wealthy enthusiasts, mastering the astrolabe became a rewarding challenge. Imagine sitting near a candlelit table. Before you rests a beautifully crafted instrument. Slowly, you align its moving parts with observations made under the night sky. Numbers, angles, and celestial positions begin to reveal patterns. The process is patient and deliberate, not unlike solving a puzzle. For many medieval enthusiasts, that challenge was precisely what made the activity enjoyable. Curiosity also extended downward from the stars to the plants growing underfoot. Throughout the Middle Ages, countless people maintained gardens. Many gardens provided food. Others supplied medicinal herbs. Some served both purposes. Yet among educated households and monasteries, gardening often became more than a practical necessity. It became a hobby. Individuals experimented with different plants. They compared growing conditions. They exchanged seeds and advice. They recorded observations about which herbs thrived under particular circumstances. Imagine a monastery garden during early spring. Rows of carefully tended plants emerge from the soil. A gardener moves slowly among them. Each plant possesses known properties. Some are valued for fragrance, others for flavor, others for medicinal use. The gardener observes changes from week to week. Growth becomes a subject of attention. Success depends upon patience rather than speed. Like many medieval hobbies, gardening rewarded long-term dedication. Knowledge accumulated gradually, season after season, year after year. In some cases, interest in plants led naturally toward experimentation. Medieval people lacked modern scientific methods, but they still observed cause and effect. They tested ideas, they recorded results, and they often shared discoveries with others. The line between practical knowledge and hobby was frequently blurred. A person who enjoyed studying herbs might also enjoy discussing them. Collecting seeds, comparing techniques, reading manuscripts that described their uses. Learning itself became part of the recreation. Among wealthier individuals, curiosity occasionally took even more unusual forms. One of the most famous examples was alchemy. Today, alchemy is often remembered for attempts to transform ordinary metals into gold. While such goals certainly attracted attention, medieval alchemy was much broader than popular stereotypes suggest. Many practitioners viewed it as an effort to understand nature. They studied materials. They observed chemical reactions. They experimented with heating, mixing, dissolving, and combining substances. Some hoped to uncover hidden principles governing the physical world. Imagine entering a private workshop late in the evening. Shelves hold glass vessels, metal containers, and handwritten notes. A small fire burns beneath an apparatus. An experiment proceeds slowly. The practitioner watches carefully, records observations, makes adjustments, waits. Hours may pass. Perhaps nothing remarkable happens. Yet the process itself remains fascinating. For many enthusiasts, Alchemy offered an endless series of mysteries to explore. Most experiments produced no dramatic discoveries, but they encouraged habits of observation and documentation that would later contribute to the development of science. Importantly, many medieval practitioners approached these activities with sincere curiosity rather than deception. They wanted answers. They wanted understanding. And the search itself became a rewarding pursuit. Mechanical devices provided another source of fascination. The later Middle Ages witnessed increasing interest in clocks, gears, and ingenious machines. Public mechanical clocks began appearing in towns and cities. To many observers, these devices seemed extraordinary. Imagine gathering in a town square and hearing a clock strike the hour. The machine operates through a complex arrangement of gears and moving parts. Most people cannot see its inner workings, yet they know it functions with remarkable precision. Such inventions inspired admiration. They also inspired curiosity. Some individuals developed strong interests in understanding how mechanisms worked. Craftsmen experimented with designs. Engineers proposed improvements. Wealthy patrons commissioned unusual devices simply because they found them interesting. Mechanical ingenuity became a form of intellectual recreation, a challenge for the mind, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Books, too, played an important role in amateur learning. Although manuscripts were expensive, educated individuals often devoted considerable time to reading, not merely for work or religious obligations, for enjoyment, for curiosity, for personal growth. A reader might spend evenings studying history, astronomy, philosophy, geography, or natural phenomena. Each manuscript opened a window onto another world, a world of ideas rather than objects. The process was slow. Pages were turned carefully, passages were reread, notes were sometimes added in margins. Knowledge accumulated gradually. Just as a collector assembled objects, a reader assembled understanding. And both activities brought satisfaction. What connects all of these hobbies is a particular attitude toward the world. A willingness to observe, a willingness to ask questions, a willingness to spend time pursuing knowledge without any immediate practical reward. Modern people sometimes imagine curiosity as a uniquely modern trait. Yet the evidence of medieval life suggests otherwise. People watched the stars, they studied plants, they experimented with materials, they investigated machines, they collected information, they exchanged ideas, they pursued understanding wherever they could find it. Often, they worked with incomplete knowledge. Sometimes they reached incorrect conclusions. But curiosity itself remained alive. And perhaps that is one of the most human qualities of all. As night deepened across the medieval landscape, a scholar might continue reading beside a candle. A gardener might plan next season's plantings. An observer might step outside to study the stars. An alchemist might watch an experiment unfold in silence. None of these individuals knew exactly where their curiosity would lead, yet that uncertainty was part of the experience. The world still contained countless mysteries, and for those fortunate enough to have time, patience, and interest, exploring those mysteries could become a hobby in its own right. A quiet hobby, a thoughtful hobby, one that transformed ordinary moments into opportunities for discovery. And in doing so, it provided medieval people with something that remains valuable today: the simple pleasure of learning for its own sake. Part 5. Performance, Storytelling, and Living History. As our journey through medieval hobbies draws toward its final chapter, we arrive at activities that were perhaps the most social of all. Some people preferred games, others devoted themselves to animals, collecting, or learning. But many found enjoyment in something far older and more universal. They enjoyed stories, they enjoyed music, they enjoyed performance, and they enjoyed gathering together to share experiences that transformed ordinary days into memorable occasions. In a world without printed novels, radio broadcasts, films, or streaming services, entertainment often depended upon people themselves. Someone had to tell the story. Someone had to sing the song. Someone had to perform. As a result, storytelling occupied an important place in medieval life. Imagine a winter evening. Outside, darkness covers the countryside. A fire burns inside a hall or cottage. Family members and neighbors gather nearby. Work has finally ended for the day. Conversation begins. Soon, someone starts telling a story. Perhaps it is a tale about a famous king. Perhaps it concerns a local legend. Perhaps it recounts the adventures of a distant traveler. The listeners already know parts of the story. They have heard it before. Yet they listen again. The pleasure comes not only from the tale itself, but from the act of sharing it together. Throughout the Middle Ages, storytelling served as both entertainment and recreation. Some individuals became especially skilled at it. They remembered long narratives. They mastered dramatic pauses. They learned how to hold the attention of an audience. In many communities, talented storytellers gained local reputations. People looked forward to hearing them speak. Stories connected generations. Older people passed knowledge to younger listeners. Historical events mixed with folklore. Legends blended with memory. The result was a rich tradition of oral culture that remained central to medieval recreation. Music played a similar role. Many people encountered music during religious services, festivals, celebrations, and seasonal gatherings. Yet music was not limited to professional performers. Amateur musicians existed throughout medieval society. Some learned simple instruments. Others sang. Still, others devoted years to improving their skills. Imagine a gathering after a successful harvest. Food has been shared. Conversation fills the air. Then music begins. A familiar melody spreads through the crowd. Some join the singing. Others simply listen. For a short time, individual concerns fade into the background. Everyone participates in a shared experience. Learning music required dedication. Instruments could be expensive. Techniques required practice. Songs had to be memorized. For many enthusiasts, however, the effort itself was rewarding. Improvement happened gradually. A player mastered a new melody. A singer expanded a repertoire. Over time, skill increased. Like archery or falconry, musical performance became a hobby built upon patience and repetition. Festivals created even larger opportunities for recreation. Throughout the medieval calendar, communities celebrated numerous religious and seasonal events. Some lasted only a day. Others continued for much longer. These occasions often included performances, processions, games, and public spectacles. Preparation could occupy weeks. Participants designed costumes, organizers planned events, musicians rehearsed, artisans created decorations. The festival itself was important, but so was the work leading up to it. Many people became deeply involved in these preparations, year after year. Their participation resembled what modern people might recognize as a hobby. Imagine a town preparing for a major celebration. Streets are decorated, flags and banners appear. Residents discuss plans and schedules. Excitement builds gradually. Everyone contributes in some way. When the event finally arrives, the entire community becomes part of the performance. Another fascinating aspect of medieval recreation involved pageantry. Pageants combined storytelling, symbolism, music, costumes, and public participation. Some presented religious themes. Others celebrated political events or local traditions. Large numbers of people might take part. Participants memorized roles, constructed props, prepared costumes, practiced movements. The final presentation could last only a short time, but preparation often required substantial effort. For many individuals, involvement in pageants became a recurring activity that provided enjoyment, purpose, and social connection. The experience was not unlike participating in community theater today. The medieval world also enjoyed various forms of amateur acting. In towns and cities, groups occasionally organized dramatic performances for local audiences. These productions ranged from simple presentations to surprisingly elaborate spectacles. Performers devoted time to learning lines and rehearsing scenes. Audiences gathered to watch familiar stories brought to life. The appeal extended beyond the performance itself. People enjoyed working together toward a common goal. They enjoyed creating something larger than any individual contribution. In many ways, the process mattered as much as the final result. One particularly interesting feature of medieval culture was its fascination with the past. Although medieval people did not think about history in exactly the same way modern historians do, they often celebrated historical figures and legendary events. Stories about famous rulers, heroic knights, and important battles circulated widely. During festivals and gatherings, these stories were sometimes reenacted or performed. Participants dressed as historical or legendary characters. They recreated scenes from popular tales. They brought familiar narratives into the present. In a sense, this represented an early form of historical recreation. People were not merely learning about the past. They were experiencing it through performance. The activity allowed communities to preserve shared memories while also creating new ones. These events remind us that medieval people did not view recreation as entirely separate from daily life. Hobbies often served multiple purposes. They entertained, they educated, they strengthened social bonds, they reinforced cultural traditions. A song could provide enjoyment while preserving local history. A pageant could entertain an audience while teaching a familiar story. A festival could create excitement while bringing an entire community together. The boundaries between leisure, learning, and social life were often blurred. And perhaps that is why these activities remained so popular. They satisfied many needs at once. As evening settled over a medieval town, the sounds of performance gradually faded. Musicians packed away instruments. Actors removed costumes. Storytellers finished their final tales. Crowds dispersed into darkened streets. Yet the experience did not end immediately. People carried memories home with them. They discussed favorite moments, repeated memorable lines, retold amusing incidents. The performance continued in conversation long after the official event had ended. These shared memories became part of community life. Year after year, people remembered particular festivals, songs, performances, and celebrations. New stories joined older ones. Traditions evolved. Generations contributed their own experiences. In this way, recreation helped create continuity between past and present. Looking back today, it is easy to focus on the differences between medieval life and our own. The technology was different. The social structures were different. The pace of life was different. Yet the desire to gather together, tell stories, make music, perform, and celebrate remains remarkably familiar. People still seek opportunities to connect through shared experiences. They still enjoy creative expression. They still find satisfaction in developing skills and participating in communities built around common interests. And so, as our exploration of unusual medieval hobbies comes to an end, we find something surprisingly recognizable beneath the surface of history. Whether training a falcon, collecting curiosities, studying the stars, competing in games, or participating in performances, medieval people pursued many of the same things people pursue today. Meaning, connection, curiosity, enjoyment, and the simple pleasure of spending time on something that brings fulfillment. Across the centuries, those desires have changed very little. Only the world around them has changed. The people themselves may have been separated from us by hundreds of years, but in their hobbies, passions, and pastimes, they often seem surprisingly close. Looking back at medieval hobbies, the world feels quieter and more familiar than expected. Beyond work and obligation, people still found time for games, animals, collecting, learning, and shared performances. These activities shaped daily life and brought moments of rest, curiosity, and connection. Although the tools and traditions have changed, the underlying impulse remains the same. People have always looked for ways to learn, to enjoy, and to spend time meaningfully. In that sense, medieval pastimes feel less distant than they seem.